the summer coat. There's the summer coat and the winter coat of the same animal, short-tailed weasel or ermine. And we have those here on the Rio Grande National Forest. And so they obviously change color. That's why we're presenting this. And, it's like the idea behind this is why do they change their color? And, one of the most basic concept to work with is survival, or to being, reduce the chance of being preyed on by other predators, such as eagles or hawks or fox or coyotes or lynx, anything that basically has eyes and teeth or talons. In the winter time, it's probably a pretty good idea to turn white to try to camouflage in the white snow. There is an idea that the black tip part of that tail is a decoy, so that the predators are led to that dark tip tail, and then hopefully not actually capture the weasel. The weasel thinks that, not the predator, but the weasel would. So that's just one example of turning white. And what's interesting is our long-tailed weasel that we also have here can also turn white, but not as prevalently as the ermine does. And we'll go a little more into that detail on the other slides later. Go ahead, Hannah, next. And the snowshoe hare also changes color too. And it, what's interesting with the ermine, when it changes color from summer to winter, it actually loses hair by hair, so to speak, follicle by follicle. Each hair is actually replaced with a white one. And so it's kind of like a complete pelage or fur change, whereas like the snowshoe hare doesn't really lose its hair. It's more like it becomes more grayed or white on the tip, and also gets filled in between the hairs, between each of its hairs. So it's kind of like a fill in. And then as the winter goes out, the hair will actually start to change too, and that's based on hormones. So it's kind of an interesting difference between the ermine and the snowshoe hare, just in the changing of the color. So that's kind of unique. And then I guess go ahead to the next one, Hannah. Well, like I was explaining before, why did they turn white was for survival from predators, but there's also these other levels of turning white. For example, the snowshoe hare turns white, and it's driven by like the daylight hours. So, they can turn white before it actually snows, and that can really kind of be a backfire on them. But it's really kind of driven by the daylight hours. So, not all these snowshoe hares turn white. They can turn or not turn and remain brown, like in the state of Washington along the coastal area. And that's again out of the survival. If you're white in a brown landscape, then you definitely will could run into issues. The other thing, like I said earlier, with the snowshoe hare, the increase of hair basically is an increase in insulation for the snowshoe hare, whereas the weasel is a replacement of the hair, and the structure of the hair is more hollow and it's more insulative, and the light can travel down through those hairs, each of those individual hairs on the ermine, and then actually warm the skin, and higher density too, because the body can produce more hairs per square centimeter, per square millimeter. So those are some of the other reasons why these animals turn white. Go ahead, Hannah, next. Now, white-tailed ptarmigan, which is also found on our Rio Grande National Forest in the high altitude, basically at around 11,000 feet to 13,000 plus feet. depending on the time of year and stuff. Basically in the alpine regions on our forest is where you'll definitely find them. And they turn white also in the wintertime to increase their survivability, again, with predators. But they also have other features. The white is really the primary thing with them, is with the predators. But the other thing that's interesting about the ptarmigan is they will, in the wintertime, start to put feathers near their nostrils, kind of to block the orifice of their nostril a little bit, so that the blowing snow, drifting snow doesn't blow down into their lungs quite as easily. Because and also they have feathers that will come out in the winter on their feet to keep their feet insulated and warm, and also create these snowshoes to be able to move across the snow. So the difference with the white-tailed ptarmigan and the dusky grouse is the white-tailed ptarmigan actually will go down into the snow. If it's a really cold, bitter night, they'll burrow into the snow and kind of get their bodies into the snow to take cover in the insulative snow, instead of fly up into trees and try to tough it out during the night. But by doing that, they're low in the snow, and then the blowing snow, again, like I was saying, can just blow into their nostrils and stuff. So they have these special little feathers on their nostrils. Their beaks will keep the snow from going in so quickly and easily. And so they don't have to fight that so hard, and thus save their energy and kind of be able to make it more comfortable. Go ahead and go to the next one, Hannah. Thanks. So yeah, we were kind of thinking, I kind of mentioned these things already before, but basically the physics of winter, gravity and freezing. So, just like that, the snowshoes, we all go out and buy $300 pair of snowshoes to go around on the snow so we can enjoy it. But they don't have that capacity, but they do have snowshoes that they have that are highly effective. And what's really cool about like the snowshoe hare and this lynx is the efficiency that they do across the snow. The more time you spend tracking them, the more you realize how interesting and how effective and efficient it all comes down to. So for example, snowshoe hare, its bone density is not quite as dense as, say, a black-tailed jackrabbit down the desert lowland or the prairie. That way it has a lower mass to foot ratio. And the lynx is a kind of the same scenario. It has large feet, but its bone density or bone mass is not near as dense or as heavy as, say, like the bobcat. And so, they may weigh the same, but if lynx are larger in volume, but equal in weight about as a bobcat. Bobcat is a little lighter than a lynx, but again, it's about the efficiency and the ratio of weight, the snowshoe size ratio, so they can move across these deep snows without really struggling too much. And that way they don't use up all their hard-earned energy. Go ahead, Hannah, next. This is a co-worker of mine that we just went out and we were looking for lynx tracks, and it was a subtle set of lynx tracks. It was underneath the snow, and kind of could detect the patterns in the snow. And I kind of have this technique of digging down underneath digging to this print. This particular print was about 12 inches below the surface of the snow. So for me, in order to get confident about who made that set of tracks, I dig down underneath and try to actually get underneath the track and pop it free of the snow. And then I kind of toss it around, and then I can start to see the patterns that are created from the animal. And each animal or species of animal has kind of a snow signature or compaction, what I call a compaction signature, that then can help me feel more confident about what animal I'm looking at. And so that's just kind of documentation of lynx tracks that we found last Friday. Go ahead, Hannah. So yeah, the subnivean lifestyle, that's the, trying to survive the winter and the engineering behind the physics of fighting cooler temperatures and the heat loss that's involved during winter versus summer. And there's all these different techniques that these creatures do. And so I wanted to talk about some of the creatures that do the under the snow kind of lifestyles during the wintertime. Go ahead, Hannah. So the one of the animals, it's a small mammal. It's called a meadow vole. It's what you see right there. It's a cute little guy. It is a herbivore. It runs around and eats leaf litter and grasses and sedges and forbs, and sometimes even insects if it has opportunities, but it's mostly an herbivore. And it also caches some of the food, much like the pika. The pika, which we don't have in this slide series, will cache, will harvest hay or alpine grasses all summer and create these big, huge hay piles for the upcoming future winter so it can have a refrigerator to go to and be able to have food. And the meadow vole does that too, but not at the huge scale that the pika does, but it still does that same technique, but in many caches or many different food storage locations. And so when the snow comes, it has to remember where those are all at. And so it starts moving through the snow, and it has these tunnels that it establishes as winter comes on, and yeah, just like that. And then you'll see all these tunnels and stuff. And a lot of times you won't see those tunnels in the deeper snows because the snow is over the top of those tunnels. In fact, a lot of times you won't see those. That's like a unique photo because the snow and heat kind of thing helped open up those tunnels. But what you will find in the summer is that pattern on the ground with the grasses and soils and stuff laid on top of the ground, because as the snowpack falls and melts, those tunnels and grasses and soils will fall down on top of the ground. And so in the summer, you'll see that pattern. And then you can know that you saw a meadow vole. Go ahead, Hannah, next. Yeah, the other part is that they're always hungry. That's one way to survive winter. The weasel on the left, or the ermine, has captured one of those meadow voles, and it's as heavy, and sometimes, many times, those voles or other small mammals that this ermine will kill, it can be as big or twice as large as that ermine. And but it will do that often in order to have a high temperature and be able to survive the really cold temperatures, is to basically have a high engine running. The shrew is one of those that's really neat too. It's definitely a high metabolic, has a high metabolism, and it has to eat all the time too. But what I just found out reading a couple days ago was some of the shrews, they can actually kind of go into a torpor. So they can, in the middle of the winter, they can go through a feeding frenzy if they hit a pocket of gold or a pocket of really great food sources. And if the temperatures are kind of conducive to really take advantage of all the opportunities that are presented to them, and really go on a binge, a feeding binge, and then go off somewhere and take a nap for a few hours, or maybe, whatever. But, in the summer, they actually have to eat like once every 3 hours or something, that because they'll starve to death. In the winter, you would think they have to eat all the time, but they have these mechanisms, like I'm trying to explain, that they can kind of go in and out of these high metabolism periods with a little bit of self-induced torpor, but then come right back out of that situation, whatever stimulus they kind of need to do on that. So that's really fascinating, I thought. Go ahead, Hannah, on the next one. The snowfly, like I said, I wanted to just present this concept. It's an insect, as you can, if you were to count those legs, it has 6 legs. It's an insect and not a spider. And it has 3 segments. It has a head and thorax and abdomen. So that helps it also put it into the insect class. And these are basically crane flies that have evolved to not have wings. And there's really little known about these creatures, and there's a lot of research that needs to be done to ask a lot of questions that we do not really know about. Like one of them be, why do they not have wings? There's a lot of good speculations and ideas out there, but really don't know. They are subnivean too. They are often found near trunks like willow stems coming up through the snow, or even tree trunks, and they'll crawl down the tree trunks to take cover, say during the night when it gets 20 below, and have the geothermal heat of the planet keep them warm. It may be 30 degrees, but that's fine for them. But then when it gets kind of a nice warm winter day, as in 25 degrees out and sunny, you'll see them crawling around on the snow out there, walking across the snow, and it's amazing because you're like, why are they doing this? I don't know why. Probably get from point A to B, but there is definitely a deeper answer than that. And so I think it would be a really cool project for people to do some research on. And just wanted to share insects and snow. Go ahead, Hannah. And yeah, I didn't really share that part. They survive through a glycol, basically, in their blood. They have a hemolymph type of blood. Our blood is iron based, and so our blood is red. It's red when it gets oxidized. When it meets oxygen, the iron in our blood turns like red, and that's why we have red blood. But insects have a hemolymph type of blood, which is basically a copper based blood. So instead of having a hemoglobin blood cell, they have a hemolymph blood cell. It's a copper based blood, and so it's the same in a way, but it's different. But the magic of this is they can have glycol in their blood, which is like antifreeze, literally, and they can walk around. I've seen them walking around at 10 degrees, literally 10 degrees Fahrenheit out there walking around on the snow. So they can handle some really cold temperatures, which is a really unique situation for an insect, because most insects, when it gets 32 degrees, they're done moving. But these guys have this capacity to move at some really cold temperatures. Go ahead, Hannah. Yeah, Hannah and I were talking about this for a long time, hibernation versus torpor, and it's quite complex. I think the science that's behind these two words is an ongoing investigation, and the more we do this, the more we learn. And so it gets pretty complex pretty fast, but I don't, I'm trying to learn, and I'm learning even more than what I knew before, and I know I'm gonna know more in a couple of years. So go ahead, Hannah, on the next. So yeah, the kind of the short, sweet part is just try to simplify it. Hannah did a good job of placing this together. Hibernation is long-term dormancy, prolonged torpor, versus torpor, short-term depression. Like I was talking about that shrew, I use the word torpor. And then they overlap. Those two kinds of physical techniques that bodies will often lower their heart rate, lower the body temperature, and lower the breathing in order to decrease the metabolic rate. And that way they can try to either survive long cold winters or survive a few hours, or if a winter is looking bad, they can go into torpor, and then if the winter is short, they can get out. It's all these mechanisms that stimulate an animal into torpor or hibernation, but we still use hibernation and torpor to carry even further discussions. Go ahead, Hannah. So the Wyoming ground squirrel is kind of what we basically call true hibernators. They are driven physiologically by the daylight hours. And the Wyoming ground squirrel will start to go into hibernation as early as middle of July through the middle of September, which is really crazy to think about. You have this small creature that just woke up like in April, and it's going to go back into deep sleep in August or September and wait all those months again. It's really amazing. So that is like what I think you really could call a true hibernator. So go ahead, Hannah, on the next one. The black bear, we often use the word hibernation, where like bears go into hibernation, which is fine to use, but as we're kind of diving into the details, it's like they're more like a torpor. They go into a torpor situation. So they'll go and den up like around November, December, and go into deep sleep, like what we're seeing in these slides, and then come out relatively early, sometimes maybe as early as February, sometimes it's March, sometimes a little later than March, more like April. It really depends on the climate that they're in, the elevations, altitudes, latitudes, also the year, if it's a drought year versus a wet year. So they have a pretty good capacity. The same individual bear can actually have different sleep patterns in its lifetime. Say these bears live, let's just say 15, 20 years. Many of those years are not going to be the same as the other years. So they just adapt to what's presented to them at the time of the season. Go ahead, Hannah. Yeah, that's another adaptation, is caching food for later. So go ahead, Hannah. The pinyon jays, I wanted to bring that in because that's a pretty cool bird. It's it's endemic to here. It's in the pinyon pine forest in the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado. And it's just another jay species. We have all these other jay species, but I wanted to kind of focus on just the pinyon jay, not the Steller's jay or the Clark's nutcracker or the gray jay. But the pinyon jay I wanted to, just because they're a population that's kind of, the trend is on the decrease, and we don't really know why necessarily. But I just wanted to bring that to attention. Could be related to the long-term drought conditions we are in and the lack of food production. But these guys, they basically cache the pinyon seeds in the ground, in stumps, and also in trees. And so if big winters come in, the stuff that's stored in the ground obviously are not going to be accessible to these guys. And that's why they mix up their caching techniques in order to have food opportunities depending on what's thrown at them. So they cache their seeds in the ground, in stumps, or in the branches or crevices of trees. So if there's a 3-foot snowstorm, they still have food access because they know about those kinds of things. That's one technique of survival. Go ahead, Hannah. Next, yep. The lynx, they cache too. Well, in the ermines, they will cache if they find a big litter of voles with a lot of young ones, or it's kind of a, maybe they actually discovered one of those colonies of Wyoming ground squirrels, and you have 10 of them sleeping together. They're gonna definitely take advantage of that and cache it, so they have that food reserved for the future. The lynx, they don't hibernate, but they are also cache food for later. So I've been out and about tracking these lynx, and there have been times where the lynx I've seen them cache up to 4 snowshoe hares in less than one day. I was basically tracking this lynx, and it was killing snowshoe hare after snowshoe hare. First one it killed, it pretty much ate, and it's only that what was left over was its feet. The next kill site, half of the rabbit was the hare, snowshoe hare was eaten, but it was also buried underneath snow for future consumption. And then the same cat killed 2 more snowshoe hares, but just buried them in snow for future use. So that's definitely what we call caching, and that's for saving for later. So yeah, those are the techniques that a lot of these animals do. Is that all, Hannah? I think that might be it. Yeah, are there any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Feel free to put a question in the chat or just raise your hand and shout it out. We've learned lots of ways to weather this winter, so thanks, Doug, for sharing. I think we had one question early on. I think Greg asked, when you're talking about the ptarmigan, if they get completely covered in snow, can they still breathe? Like if it all, I think he's asking if it all blows and drifts into the little hole they're in. How do they deal with all of that?
Good question. I think they, I've seen them in some really harsh situations, and they definitely strategize. They may pick a spot that they thought was good, and maybe the weather patterns have shifted dramatically and the winds have really shifted. They may actually have to physically get up and reshift their position based on the dynamic change that just occurred, where they thought it was good and now it's not. Just like how we might set up our own campsite and we're like, yeah, this is good, and then we wake up in the morning and realize that it wasn't a very good decision. So the ptarmigan definitely struggle with that too, but that does seem like they kind of know how to choose really well. I've seen them up against the bases of willows in not as windy spots to try to not lose their heat to wind chill. And I've seen them shake their heads to, shake the snow that's drifting on their heads and on their nostrils so they can continue to breathe. But they have to stay on top of it.
So thanks, Doug. I mean, the mention of the ptarmigan doing that, but years ago, let me say many years ago, when I was working on the Gunnison National Forest, we were early season up at the Friends Hut, and the snow came in fast and furious. I'm walking down to get out of there. I thought, oh, well, it's time to go. And flushed blue grouse that I had no idea was there because it was completely covered with snow. And I'm wondering, can you talk about that for a minute? How do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, if a blizzard's coming in and they're have made a decision that probably best to just hang tight. Maybe they did find a nice spot that they felt comfortable taking that chance of staying in that one spot, and you happen to move them out of their spot. But when it made that decision, it was, felt like it was a good decision. But you saw one completely buried and it came out of the snow. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, if it's not like the ptarmigan where it's drifting in hard and tight snow crystals and stuff, and I'm sure it happens to the ptarmigan again, but you can actually be buried in snow, and as long as you're not in a panic and you're breathing relatively slow and comfortable, then you can continue to breathe and not have an issue. It's really not that big of a deal to be underneath snow, as long as it's not like avalanche debris, and as long as you're not in a panic. You can still, it's just like snow caving. You build a snow cave and sleep in it, you can totally, go to sleep that night real well.
Thanks,
and
Doug.
I think that may have been the case. I feel like, and the other part of what might have been the case is, as ptarmigan or blue grouse flush in front of you, your fear factor, pegs through the roof.
Right.
So maybe he wasn't buried. I thought he was, but.
Well, no, I can believe that. I'm not going to say I know, I totally can see that as a possibility. I'm not sure if I've seen it quite yet, but I have seen ptarmigan almost basically buried. So I can see that that's a possibility, especially if you have a 1-inch snowstorm and it's already snowed like 12 inches.
Right.
I can see that being an issue for them. Yep.
Right on. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, thanks. We have a couple more questions. One is, approximately how much did that link that you were carrying, Doug, weigh in the first slide? And that was from Dave Jones.
Oh, yeah. It probably was around 22 pounds. That's the average weight. We would capture lynx between 17 pounds to 24 pounds would be the weight range. And then the average would be like 22 for a male and 21 pounds for a female.
Thanks. And someone else said they saw lots of bear scat almost every 20 feet along the Liberty Trail 2 weeks ago towards Dead Man's Creek. Any idea why they might be seeing bear scat this time of year?
Well, it sounds like the bear didn't really feel the need to go into its den and do a torpor or go to sleep for a while. I did read that some bears will or are often found not necessarily doing that, and specifically if they're near human habitation sites. So if they're near the town of Crestone or near South Fork or Gunnison, some of those bears may choose to not to go to sleep because their chances of finding food are pretty high and it's worth the risk to be up. Whereas a black bear that's more in the quote wild area, not near human activity areas, it would be a risk for it to do that activity such, during the dead of the winter and could starve to death. So, yeah, those would be, environmental stressors or environmental information that the bear has taken into consideration, has decided to make one decision or the other.
Thank you. And we have another question from Tammy. What about chipmunks? They have a family in their yard. Do they hibernate? Are they active? And also fox. They've seen foxes around in the winter as well. So what do those two critters do in the winter?
It's a good question. I on the chipmunk, I really don't know the answer still because I had thought that they hibernate, and probably 15 years ago, I realized that I was wrong. I've seen them out and about in the middle of like January 1st in 20 below temperatures and 3 feet of snow on rock ridges. I was mystified by that, but I was amazed by that, and I wanted to dig into figuring that out. And the little bit of digging I did do came back with different answers. I think we have I think up to 14 or 13 species of chipmunks in the state of Colorado, and each of those species have unique adaptations. And so I think my answer could be, that's the thing, is it gets complex quickly because of the different ways that each of these species of chipmunks manage their situation. So I don't really know the answer, but I'm sorry I don't, but I definitely can.
I was just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And on the fox,
just curious because we haven't seen them, since we have snow. We have snow. We've got we still have 3 or 4 inches of snow in our backyard where they live, and we haven't seen them for several months. So I was assuming that they hibernated. Yeah.
And it could be the ones right by you could be the ones that were different than the ones I saw. The ones I saw were kind of like in the foothills, the desert here, and I do think it was a different chipmunk than maybe the one you're seeing. And that's why I kind of answered like I think it depends on the actual species of chipmunk, and that's why I don't really know it because there's 13 of them to memorize. Or I don't even know if I have that number right. There could be 16 of them. I don't know. But yeah, it's a good question, and I want to actually know more about that myself. And on the fox, they don't hibernate or go to sleep. They're out and about all year. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was just surprising to see them walk through the yard in the middle of the day. We know they're around at night, but we just had never seen one in the middle of the day. So in the middle of the winter, it's like this red fox on this white snow. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Right.
To see them go through. So anyway, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Doug, I have another question I'd ask you for the good of the order, but I'd like to remind folks that are on, please go ahead and drop your name in the chat. We'll have a drawing here shortly to give away a cool little water bottle. So drop your name in the chat if you'd like to be included in that. So Doug, you know, very often we're asked here at our front desks about the lynx populations. And so you talked about them before, and you know, their main food is that snowshoe hare. So I guess one of the questions I'd like to know for us, pardon me, everybody, is can you tell us the status of the lynx population here on the Rio?
Nah, not really accurately. In fact, that's a question that was asked like, oh, probably 8 years ago, and is asked every year, how are the lynx doing? And
so you're saying I should
they,
go ask the lynx, huh?
right? And, you know, and we're on year 8 of a 10-year project to scientifically answer that question in a relatively confident direction. So all I can say is we do have lynx on our forest. How are they doing? I do not know. But we will start to see. They did a preliminary. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife did a preliminary kind of mid, 10-year report or analysis of that question, and they felt like the answer was that they're stable, but they weren't able to say much more than that. So what I'm hoping by the end of the 10 years, we'll be able to say they're here, but the trend is that they're stable or increasing or decreasing. We'll be able to answer that in a more confident way. So that's why it's really not known, but they're here and they still reproduce. They still exist and they still are having kittens. So that's an answer that I could say.
Got any pictures of kittens to show us?
Not easily accessible right now. It's all in the wrong spot.
I want furry and fluffy.
We have one more, Doug. Ariel asked it and said she's never heard of the snowfly before tonight. Are there any other insects that might be common to see in the winter? I think we talked a little bit about the snow fleas or the springtails when I was chatting with you. Maybe you want to share about what else you might see out there that looks like a black speck on the snow.
Yeah, there's a springtail. It's a really small, I mean, it's only like a millimeter long. And I used to call it an insect, but I think just 2 years ago, it's been reclassified into, I got to look at it again, but it's no longer in with the insects. It's really small, and that's why they call it a snow flea. It's really about the size of a flea, and it's black. And so you'll see it like in March. Say if you go snowshoeing, you may not see it right away, but then when you're coming back, you may see like this weird gray color that's inside of each of your tracks that you set on the way out. Now you're coming back. And if you actually take the time to stop and look at the dirt and the snow, you'll discover that there's snow fleas, and there'll be thousands to millions of them. The other insects that I've seen that kind of on warm winter days, maybe like mid-February when the sun comes out, it was something I was wanting to dig it deeper into, but I have not. But I've seen it, the spruce budworm. I've seen an actual few adults flying around in the middle of February, but when I look at the literature, it doesn't really say that. So, things that we put in the books don't always match perfectly to what we experience out there. That's why it's fun to be out there, to discover new things.
Thanks, Doug. We have another question from Stephanie. How do subnivean critters fare when there's minimal snowpack but really cold temperatures?
That's a great question. I don't really know the answer. I would suspect that that's probably not a good scenario. Yeah, because they definitely depend on deep snow, certain species for sure. You know, and that's an interesting question because, like, for example, the great gray owl, which is in like the Pacific Northwest and then also in Canada, it flies around and it is specialized in flying over these snowpacks and discovering the sound of these voles that are doing their activity underneath the snow. So if the snow is shallow, it's easy pickings for the the great gray owl. So you can see that it would be beneficial to the great gray owl, but probably not so for the vole. But if it's really deep snow, it would be hard for the great gray owl and better for the vole, but there might be ramifications that could turn into the future, as in maybe there might be an overpopulation of voles because they weren't hunted and maybe their populations are high. And so, you know, it's a good question. And I'm sure there's some research papers on that. And I would think they would dive into that much better than I have.
Thanks, Doug. Dave Jones brought up that spruce beetles flying in February. That's probably not good news for the spruce trees. Do you have any other info about how that might work?
Well, it was spruce budworms, which is like a moth. It's an actual, in the Lepidoptera order, it's an insect. So yeah, it's a caterpillar or butterfly. It's a moth actually. But it's not a beetle, a spruce bark beetle that I saw. It was the moth. But it's still a good point, as in they're getting out and flying around and possibly mating early like that, and then going laying eggs on the base of the needles of the furs and stuff to start the process over again. And as you probably have seen, Dave, with the spruce budworm, they definitely hit the needles of the younger trees pretty hard, and year after year it's hard on those trees. For sure. But again, you know, the spruce budworm is a native endemic insect, so it's not an invasive insect. It is part of the ecosystem, so it's good to think about those levels too.
Well, it looks like that's it, I think, for questions. Feel free to send me an email if you have any more, and we can work with Doug to try and get you some answers on that. And thank you, Doug, for joining us today and sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate it. That was awesome. So kind of looking up at next month, we have another forest specialist series, another presentation on sandhill cranes, tying in with our local crane festival. So that program will be held right back here on Zoom at 5 p.m. on March 16th. So we hope you'll see you here. Again, if you are interested, feel free to message me your email, and I can alert you of when that's coming up. I can put you on our list to send that email out to. And also if you want to be kept in the loop about any other future programs. So as we mentioned before, we do have a door prize for this month, and it was this awesome SJMA water bottle here. So our winner this month was Dave Jones. So Dave, if you want to message me, if you can stop by the Divide District office and pick it up, or we can always stick it in the mail if you're not around locally right now. And if you are interested in getting your very own clean canteen, SJMA has a sale right now. You can use the code CLEAN, KLEAN 5 on SJMA's website, so sjma.org/store, to get your very own clean canteen or to share with a friend. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, Doug, and to the National Forest and SJMA as well for helping us host this.
Thank you everyone for coming.